Hi, welcome back to the studio. I'm Sarah and I've been an accessory designer and maker, educator and milliner for over 30 years. And in this video, I'm going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to take you on a bit of a journey with me and we're going to make one of the hats from my new collection together. So I'm going to be working with Buckram, which is unusual in itself. It's not a fabric I use very often. So we're going to be blocking it, putting the pieces together and finishing the whole hat over a series of videos. And in this first video, we are going to start with the equipment that you need to get blocking Buckram, the kind of Buckram that I choose to use, and how I get it on the block so that it's firm and ready to be put together to make the perfect hat. So the hat I'm working on today is going to be this little Buckram paisley piece. This is a rough concept of it, but before I start making a hat, the first thing I really like to do is flesh it out completely. So from kind of rough concept and choosing the materials that I'm going to be using, the next step is to really draw out each step of the hat, so each view of it, so I understand how all the pieces are going to actually go together. I have a bit of a design approach, and that is I design a hat I really want to make rather than design to the blocks I actually own. I don't own that many blocks, so I'd kind of be stuck with just a few styles if that's the approach I took. So I've got nothing that looks like this bit of paisley. So what I'm going to have to do is make it work with other blocks and put into practice some of my millinery skills to get the actual hat that I want. So to get this hat, I'm going to use two different blocks. I'm going to use a basic skull block to get the bit that's sitting on the crown of my head. And then I'm going to use the side of this beret block to get a beautiful curve up that also has a roundness to it. It's going to curve up and create this side of the hat here. So I'm going to be joining my buckram in two places to get this perfect paisley shape this way and the beautiful curve up that I'm looking for on the side. Let's have a look at the equipment you're going to need to do this first part of this buckram hat. First up, you're going to need the blocks you're going to be working with. Make sure they are with a stand so that you can work over your block. We tend to work from the top down when we're working with buckram. So you want a little bit of height there so you can really pull on it and get the most out of it. Then you need to make sure that you've got some glad wrap and some sticky tape so that you can keep these blocks both protected and make sure it's easy to get the buckram piece off there when we're done. Buckram tends to kind of ripple a little bit when it dries, so we need to really make sure it's firmly on the block, and that can be hard to get off later, and glad wrap is going to help you do that. The next thing I'm going to need, obviously, is the buckram I'm going to be working with. So I've got a 90 centimeter wide, which is wide enough for most jobs that I'm going to do. And it is 100% organic cotton and it's pre-stiffened. I've got a medium weight here. And while when we do this hat, I'm going to do it in a double layer, I still think it's the best kind of weight to start with. Next, I'm going to need a whole bunch of drawing pins to help hold this down. It does tend to kind of ripple a little bit if it's not held down really firmly, and you want it to be as smooth as it can be in that first blocking process. So heaps of thumbtacks, obviously a hammer to hammer them in with, and because you do tend to move them around a little bit, grab a pair of pliers and have those on hand as well. Blocking buckram does get really messy and really dirty, so you want to have all of your equipment with you so you don't have to be rifling through things with wet, sticky hands. The next thing I'm going to need is a blocking cord. I want to have that on hand, and I know it's probably going to be helpful for this part of this block, which I'm going to be working on. Might not be necessary for all projects that you're doing. And then make sure that you grab your everyday scissors. Buckram is crisp and it's hard. It's kind of like cutting crispy cardboard, so you don't want to be using your fabric scissors for this one. Grab your everyday ones that are a little bit less precious. Now that we have our blocks super securely wrapped in cling film, the next step is getting ready to block. And I am going to block what looks like way more buckram than I actually need. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is I've not made this hat before, so I want to make sure I've got a little bit of excess so that I can inch my way towards what I think is going to be the final shape. You can see it drawn on here, but I've still cut out here as my first cut just to see where I'm going, because buckram, well, it's not impossible, it is a little bit tricky to add it back on when you're finished. So I don't want too many joins in this hat. I already have to have a join here. So I'm going to block a little bit more than I should. Also, buckram does have a little bit of a tendency to buckle a little bit as it's drying. It kind of, shrinks itself back up again. So I want to make sure I've got lots of extra buckram so that I can really pull on it, keep it super tight over the bit that I actually want to be using. So just making sure that the core bit of it is going to be really smooth and really tight on the block. So I want a little bit of extra so that I can actually pull on it really firmly. I'm also going to be doing this in double. So while the buckram I've got is really nice and crisp and has lots of body already to it, this hat is going to have to do a lot of work. I want to make sure that I keep this beautiful curve that I've got going here and that it can support the weight of all the trimming that I'm going to put on this side of the hat. I don't want it to be kind of falling down and losing this gorgeous curve up here. So the more structure I've got at the beginning, the better and easier this hat is going to be to actually make. Before I cut my buckram, I am going to just measure down how deep I think I want this to go. So the edges of buckram get really messy. I'm going to make sure that I've got enough to really pull down heaps of pinning and still have this beautiful clear smooth crown sitting on the top. So I'm actually going to cut a piece that is around 30 centimeters square for that one. And I think that's going to be about the same measurement, 25 to 30 centimeters, to do this one as well. So I'm going to cut 4 pieces, 2 for each block, and then get started on the blocking. When I'm getting my buckram ready for blocking, what I want to be doing is making sure I'm spraying right out to the edges. If I don't get right out to the corners really nice and wet, I'm going to not have enough stretch. I'm not going to be able to pull on them, and it's going to affect the stretch in the rest of the pieces. I'm also flipping them around to make sure both pieces, which I'm wetting at the same time, are getting nice and wet. What I want to end up with is really pliable, beautiful buckram that's nicely damp, but not dripping wet. I don't want to lose all the beautiful stiffening that I've got in this and leave it all on my table. So it's finding the perfect kind of sweet spot where it all moves really beautifully, but isn't so wet that it's like trying to work with an old rag. So you can see here, it's moving really beautifully. I've got heaps of stretch in it, and it's ready for me to start blocking. Now that I've got my buckram wet, it's time to get blocking. So I'm going to block in 2 separate pieces to start with and then kind of bring them together. I'm going to just smooth them out a little bit so that I have a bit more control over what I'm doing. And don't worry, all these creases get pulled out during the blocking process. I'm going to grab my first piece, keep my other one over there, and now my hands are super sticky, so make sure you've got all your equipment ready to go. I've got my pins, my pliers, my hammer, and I've also got my water bottle in case I feel like I need a little bit more moisture in this. First step is to get your first layer on and secure it front to back. So this is across a straight grain of it, so I haven't got a huge amount of stretch here, but just enough to get it moving across the block. Hammer these in. Once you've got front to back looking good, kind of nice and tight, but not too tight. Like I'm not pulling too hard on this, and that's because really I use the bias to get the most out of it. Now that I've got it secured on, I'm going to go my other sides again across my straight grain, and now I'm starting to really pull on it now that it's actually secured to the block. Pinning this bit on, hammering that in, getting the other side done. And then I'm going to really use these bias bits to get the shape looking great. So I'm going to pull at the same time on both of those pieces, and you can see how the hat is really starting to mold to the block now. And as usual, I'm kind of working the diagonals in this hat to make sure that it's really evenly pulled onto the block. I'm not hammering in too tightly because I know I'm probably going to need to move those. Now I can pull on the opposite pieces of bias, and you can see how smoothly that has now blocked onto this. Hammer those down, and that is really all that I'm going to secure it right now. I'm going to put on my next layer and then start to really secure it to the block. So smoothing that down, it is less than perfect right now, but I'm going to use this second piece to kind of get the underneath piece working really beautifully. So grab this piece, and what I want to do is put it on the diagonal. So instead of my cross grain or my straight grain going across the front and the sides, it's going to go across the diagonal. And that means I can use my bias pieces here to help hold down the sides, and it's going to help smooth out the whole piece. But I start exactly the same way. I'm going to start on the straight grey, pull that down, just one pin to secure it. Now that I've got the first piece of this hat blocked, it's time to get started on the second bit. And I'm going to work through this in almost exactly the same way, wetting down both pieces of my buckram and working on the first piece, pulling it on the straight grain, and then putting on the second piece and swapping that grain around so that the top bit starts to hold down the bottom piece. Now that I've got this beautifully sitting on the block, I want to make sure I've got this kind of headline crease in here because it's a beautiful part of the design and it's going to give me this really gorgeous curve up through here. So all I'm going to do to make sure that that is in there is grab my blocking cord, pull it down to where the cord line actually is, and you can see it is really defining that shape and smoothing it down, and then pinning it just at either end of the cord line. Thanks for joining me in the studio today. Now that we've got the first steps of this hat done with the blocking all finished, make sure you like and subscribe to the channel to catch the next steps in making this hat and see what else we've got going on behind the scenes in the studio.